I wanted to play the segment from the O'Reilly Factor from Friday night when the only admitted socialist in Congress, Bernie Sanders, was interviewed. And I say admitted because there are a lot of socialists in Congress. They just don't have the courage to admit that they're socialists. They don't want to come out of the closet, right, and fess up because they're afraid that, you know, they might pay a price for it at the polls. So they're closet socialists. And, you know, you got to at least, you know, respect Bernie Sanders for that. I mean, I disagree with, you know, just about everything he says, although not everything. Once in a while he does say something that I agree with. But most of the time, you know, I mean, he's totally wrong. But at least I respect the fact that he has the integrity or the courage to admit that he's a socialist, unlike his fellow socialists who are still in the closet. But I wanted to play a little bit of his interview from the O'Reilly Factor. It's pretty interesting. So let's play the first of these two clips that I got. First one is cut number 23.
So let's start with number one. You are a socialist. What does that mean?
What it means is that we have a lot to learn from democratic socialist governments that have existed in countries like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, where all people have health care as a right, where higher education is free, where they have a strong child care program, where they don't have the massive type of income and wealth inequality that we have in the United States of America.
All right.
So first of all, you know, he asked what socialism means, and he didn't really give an explanation of what socialism means. I mean, I'm assuming he understands what it means, but he just, you know, went into his politics. But it's interesting when he says we have a lot to learn from Sweden and Norway. We do have a lot to learn from those countries. Unfortunately, Bernie Sanders hasn't learned anything from those countries. Those countries proved that socialism failed, that it didn't work. That's why it is being dismantled in those countries. That's why the countries that he's talking about are moving in the opposite direction. That's why Sweden abolished their capital gains tax. That's why Sweden abolished their inheritance tax. You know, Sweden is moving in the opposite direction. You know, Sweden is a perfect example of the failures of socialism. You know, Sweden became very wealthy, like many countries, before they became socialist. But in their wealth, right, they began to feel guilty or, you know, maybe they responsible. And they said, look, the government should guarantee people certain benefits. And, of course, when the government first enacted all this cradle-to-grave socialism, not that many Swedes took advantage of it because they were hardworking. They grew up in an era that didn't have all of this socialism. And so it wasn't a big problem originally. But as new people were born and they grew up in this socialist environment, they didn't have the old work ethic that made the country so rich that they can afford the generosity of socialism. So then you had people growing up in socialism, and they were very much like the guy that we were talking about yesterday, the surfer, living on welfare. Sweden created a situation where it was so comfortable not to work, and the taxes on working were so high to pay for all the people that didn't work, that more and more people were just choosing a lifestyle of, you know, living off the government. And the country was going broke, as were Norway, Denmark. All the countries that adopted all this socialism were going broke. Now, guys like Bernie Sanders would look at a wealthy country in Scandinavia and see, oh, they're socialist. See, so socialism must work. No, they didn't get wealthy while they had these socialist policies. They only adopted the socialist policies after they achieved the wealth. So you have to have wealth to redistribute. Right? So they're wealthy. They made the mistake of adopting socialism. Guys like Bernie Sanders says, aha, socialism must be why they're rich. When he's got the cart before the horse, then they adopt socialism and the economies start to fail. They turn a success into a failure, and now they have to get rid of it, and Bernie Sanders doesn't connect the dots. He still doesn't understand what's going on in these countries, so he's learned nothing. You know, what we should learn from these social democracies is why it doesn't work, not why it's a success, but why it's a failure. But Bernie Sanders and other socialists never want to admit that. That's why, if you look at the countries that we are investing in Euro-Pacific capital, Norway and Sweden are high on our list. We're investing there. Why? Because they're socialists? No. But because they learned that socialism doesn't work. And the pendulum is swinging in the other direction, and it's not going to stop. And their economies are improving, not because of the socialist policies they have, but because of the socialist policies they've eliminated. And as they eliminate more and there's a payoff, right, now they do more. So, he's got a lot to learn there. But here's where the interview kind of gets on the funny side, because, Bernie Sanders wants high income taxes. And, whenever you ask these guys, okay, you want to raise my taxes, how high do you want to raise them? Like, I had that on Occupy Wall Street. I would tell people, you don't think the rich are paying enough. How much should we pay? And whenever they actually gave me a number, the number they gave me was less than I was already paying. It shows you how much they know. They say, oh, you're not paying your fair share. Well, how much should I pay? And they come up with a number that's already less than I'm paying, right? The disconnect. Well, here you have, O'Reilly trying to, get Bernie Sanders to come up with a number. And they're always reluctant to do that. But have a listen. This cut number 24.
Me, I make a lot of money. Did you know that, Senator?
I kind of guessed that.
Yeah, I make a lot. So what is my income tax rate under your administration? What would it be?
It'll be more than it is right now.
No, give me a number. Give me a,
no, I'm not going to give you a number. It's something that you have to look at and study.
70, 80%?
Well, we used to have, as you know, under Dwight D. Eisenhower, I think the nominal tax rates were over 90%.
Yeah, but
Well, no, the point is, look, Bill, you have massive income and wealth inequality. You got 1 out of 4 corporations in this country paying nothing in taxes. GE has not paid federal income taxes.
But you got to give me, as a voter, an idea of what kind of pain you're going to inflict on me. So,
well, you're not going to get it right now. That's a policy question.
All right, you're going to punt on that one. Okay.
Now, first of all, he says it's a policy question. He says, it's something that we have to study. Well, hasn't he been studying it? I mean, how long has this guy been in Congress? He has no idea. He wants higher taxes, but he has no idea how high. I mean, if he's saying we got to wait to study it, what's he been doing his entire career? I mean, hasn't he already given it some thought? I mean, it's not like, he's hearing this question for the first time. Hey, how high should rates be? Oh, gee, I don't know. I mean, I got to study it. I mean, he's advocating higher rates. He's been advocating them for years, for decades. Doesn't he know? How high does he want it to go? Then they bring up this idea, well, it used to be 90% under Eisenhower, as if anything less than 90% is some kind of a gift. Like, well, it used to be 90%, so, I only want 80%. You're getting a good deal, But they don't even want to come out and say 80%. But, again, what nobody likes to point out is that when the tax code was 90%, nobody paid it. I mean, I would personally, I would take for myself the 1950 tax code with a 90% top rate. I would take that code over the code we got right now because I would pay less in taxes. I wouldn't have to be moving to Puerto Rico, because there are so many deductions and loopholes. And, of course, back then, there were no 1099s. It was so easy not to pay taxes. Back they didn't have computers tracking you, right? It was easy to put your money offshore. I mean, believe me, if we had 1950s technology and 1950s tax code, I'd be fine. I wouldn't be paying. It's not good for the country, right? Because it makes it more difficult for businesses to succeed and grow with that type of tax code. But if you're already wealthy, if you already have operating businesses, it was a lot easier to shelter your income from tax back then than it is today. But those 90% tax brackets, that's nothing to brag about. We should be ashamed of the fact that we ever had, raised taxes to such confiscatory levels. I mean, we had a 13th Amendment. We abolished slavery. We said there's no involuntary servitude. I mean, if the government really takes 90% of what you produce, you're a slave. You're not a free man. I mean, under what definition of freedom does a free man only get 10% of what he produces? Under slavery, and this is one of the reasons that slavery is bad economics. Not only is it immoral, but it's bad economics. It's estimated that the cost of a slave equaled 90% of the productivity of the slave, meaning that, whatever a slave generated, let's say if I had a plantation and the slave generated $1,000 in revenue, I had to spend $900 in housing him, feeding him, giving him medical care, making sure he didn't escape, all that kind of stuff. It was very inefficient. So the slave got 90 cents on the dollar returned to him. Whereas the other way, a 90-10, meaning that the free man gets 10 cents and the government keeps 90. I mean, that is not freedom, it's slavery. It is a national embarrassment that we ever had rates so high. Remember, when the income tax was first enacted, the top rate was 7%. And somebody said, hey, let's limit it to 10%. I wish they'd have done that. But the reason they didn't put a 10% cap is because they were afraid if they put a 10% cap, they might actually raise them to 10%. They didn't want to give them a target, so they should have put the cap at 7%. A lot of things they did wrong with the income tax, and we're suffering as a result.